So each month I love using our treasure box to create. You may see I'm wearing nothing because I'm going to show you some really simple things that you can make with our treasure box, including some ways to easily make your jewelry stay. Now you don't need the treasure box to get the idea for this, but you can see that you can do some really simple jewelry that you can then add to your stash or your jewelry supply that you can wear over and over and over again. These are great for layering necklaces. They're great designs to make longer, shorter, or even just the simple bracelet. Like I'm gonna show you how to do basically a step up from basic beading. So this month's subscription box did a lot of beautiful, really rich and royal colors. And I wanted to show that you can use simple seed beads with a bunch of different beads in between and get a great necklace, or even think about it as a wrap bracelet when you are designing. As I was creating, I thought it was a great time to show you basically that step up from basic beading is how to add some elements to your basic stringing designs really, really simply. And one of the ways to do so is to capsulate or encapsulate your beads looking like they're bezeled or like they're jeweler set without having to do so. So in the subscription box, you've got the bicones and those mirrored round beads and some 11/0 seed beads. I'm going to change up the colors and use some of my stash from the warehouse here, going with the amethyst color. I'm going to go with some of the purple swirl here of my bicones and some silver beads with a nice clasp guarding clasp. The first thing we're going to do is get out our beads, and then I'm actually going to be using thread and needle for this. So you might say, I've only ever used beading wire. You can do this with beading wire, but if you decide to go above and beyond and to encapsulate your bicones with the seed beads like we're gonna do, I would suggest using beading thread. The beading thread that I'm using is our dragon thread, and we're gonna be using that so we can take our seed beads along the outer edge. These 11/0 seed beads are going to be your standard size of seed bead. And in this month's box, you got a whole tube. That's why this technique and these tutorials are kind of focusing on the seed beads, because you've got a lot to use and it's in my favorite color. So if we're doing it in silver and we're doing it in amethyst here, the first thing we're going to do is get ready to thread our needle, and I'm going to show you how to do so. So the first thing you need to know is how to thread your needle. I'm using, again, that dragon thread, and I like to think about it as if I'm getting ready to put a needle onto my thread, not threading the needle. So the opposite mindset. You can see I'm taking my chain nose pliers and I'm flattening out the thread. From there, I'm gonna hold my needle and kind of pinch a little bit. You get to see my burned nail there. And you are going to take your needle and push it down onto the thread. You can see it goes on there, and then you can usually pull it through the eye of the needle, or if you have your pliers usually for crimping, you can do that here too. The first thing we're going to do is tie it onto a clasp. I'm going to be using this beautiful clasp guarding clasp here. I'm going to separate it so I can tie it onto one end of my thread. Going through, I'm just taking my needle and thread through the clasp, making a loop, and then tying one and tying two knots. If you have a wire guard or wire protector, you can certainly use that, but if you're just getting started and wanting to learn more than basics, you may not have those items. Just tie it directly to your clasp. We'll go through and reinforce it after we go and do our first loop around. Number one, we are going to work on our pattern. 3 seed beads, 1 crystal, 3 seed beads, 1 bicone. That's going to repeat the whole length of the bracelet, adding in then our 3 seed beads, crystal, 3 seed beads, bicone. As you're doing so, you can push it down on your needle and thread. And I started out with about 5 feet of that, more than you need, but it's always nice in case you decide you want to make it a necklace instead. Go ahead and string the rest of your design, and then I'm going to show you how we attach the clasp on the other side and get ready for our first pass of beads for our bezeling look. Once you have the length done for your bracelet, you're going to pick up your other side of your clasp, and you are going to go through the loop at the end, or add your wire guard, go through that, and then we're just going to simply tie it here. I'm not going to worry too much about tying it tight or getting it right down, because we'll be able to go through and reinforce it as we come back down through the piece. So we're just going in, tying a knot, and now we're going to reverse our thread and needle and bring it back the other way. Reversing the thread and needle back the other way, we are going to go back through our 3 11/0s as well as our crystal and come out after the 3 11-0s before the bicone. Now this is the trick, and this is the way that we're going to get it to sit. We are going to add an additional 5 beads along the outside of the bicone. The second pass, we're not going through the same bead. If we go through the same bead, the seed beads on either side, we'll want to simply roll to the same side of the bead, and then you'll get 2 loops on one side and none on the other. So this is the cheat that you've been wanting to watch, so you know how to do so. So the first time around, you're coming out right before the bicone. Depending on your size of your bead, you're going to add seed beads. In my case here, I'm adding 5 seed beads, skipping over the bicone here. So here's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seed beads, skipping over the bicone and sewing into the next 3 11s, through the crystal, through the next 3 11s, and on through and out before the next bicone. You can see that decorates one side of the bicone. You're going to do this the whole way up through the bracelet, adding on an additional 5 seed beads, skipping over that bicone, and then sewing through your next set of seed beads, crystal, seed beads, and out. Pull that thread through, and you can see that decorates the outside of the bicone. You're going to continue to do so the whole length of the wrist, decorating out those other 6 that are still remaining. Adding in the last of my 5 beads along the side, I'm going to pull my thread through to the last seed beads here. I'm going to go through that clasp one more time. I'm going to then come down through the seed beads, down through the 6 millimeter crystal, and then I'm going to go out after the first 2 seed beads after the crystal. So we've been coming out right before the bicone. Now what we're going to do is switch it up a little bit to get it to sit correctly. Let's see if I can get this on the first pull. There we go. Coming out after the 2 seed beads there. So you can see where that needle's coming out before the 3rd bead. So every time we're going down this pass now, we are going to exit prior to that 3rd bead. Again, if we go down the 3rd bead and we add 5 more seed beads, it's going to go from one side to the other and kind of rotate. Instead, what we're going to do is add extra seed beads here. You can see they're starting up a little bit. And we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seed beads this time instead of 5. Skip over that first bead and go into the second 2. So coming out the bead number 2 of that set of 3, we're going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Skip over bead number 1 of the 11-0s after the bicone and sew through beads number 2 and 3. Go through the 6 millimeter round, then through the 11-0s 1 and 2 after it. And get ready then to add your seed beads on the outer edge as well. Once again, picking up 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then once you have those 7 on, skip over the bicone as well as the seed bead before it. Skip over the seed bead after the bicone and sew through the 2 11-0s, the 6 millimeter round, and then the 2 11-0s after. Push those seed beads to the side of that bicone, and there you get that nice bezel look. They're not turning from one side to the other, and they're staying in place for the design. You're going to continue doing that the whole way along your project to get that not basic beaded bracelet style. When you get to the end of the design here, you're coming out the last 3 seed beads. You want to make sure to go through the clasp and reinforce, getting another line through there. And then guess what? We're going to take our needle and thread back to that starter side really simply through all 3 beads, then your crystal, then through all 3 beads, then the bicone. So you're that initial center row, we're going to run our thread and needle back to it and then tie our thread end off to complete our not so basic beaded bracelet. Again, now that we're done at the end, I'm going to make sure to go through my clasp, 1 more loop. And I intentionally did the knot here at the little tongue of my clasp because usually the tongue itself will hide that knot so you won't see it, rather than having it really visible at the end of the clasp. Go in then and just tie off those thread ends right over left, left over right. And I would suggest taking the one that the needle is still on, taking your needle and thread, bringing it back through the beads a tiny bit, wiggling it back through there. And then what it does is it separates out the threads. So I'm going to take my needle, or I'm going to take my thread burner here, heat up the side by pressing that little area, take that thread end, burn it down right there next to the project, and this one here. By separating out the thread ends and burning them down, I don't have as much of it showing on the exterior there. Now your not so basic strung bracelet is completed, and you can see that it gives it that updated little bezel look with the seed beads staying from side to side and not going from one to the other, just by that simple little trick of skipping over that first bead on the exterior. Thanks so much for joining me in this not so basic bracelet video. Remember, you can get that bezel look really, really simply, and if you've never beaded before or you're just starting out, this is a great one to elevate your skills just the tiniest little bit. If you haven't received our treasure box and would love to see all the contents that are in it, go ahead below the video and we'll have a link there to get back to our site. You can check out the box, everything that's in it, and if you want to, you can even purchase to do this project. As always, if you haven't yet, hit that little subscribe button and stay tuned for more inspirational designs from us here at Potomac Beads.